Hey guys, today we're adding to what we've already learned about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and we are furthering our discussion of fiscal policy. And remember, fiscal policy is when the government purposefully manipulates the AD curve using the C and G functions to try and fix recessions and inflation, okay? So in order to understand why the government would do this, we have to learn a new curve on our graph, and it's called the long run aggregate supply curve. And let me show you really quickly what it looks like. It looks like this. This is the long run aggregate supply curve right here. This is our old SRAS curve and our AD curve. We already know that, okay? So long run aggregate supply is completely vertical, and it should be, and it represents how much stuff we are able to make if we're at full employment. And remember, our definition of full employment isn't really full employment, like 100% employment or 0% unemployment. It's employed plus frictional plus structurally unemployed, because those are the types of unemployment that are temporary. They're not bad for the economy, okay? So we count them in full employment. So LRAS shows us what we should be producing if our economy is behaving correctly and is in a good place. And yesterday we denoted Y. We denoted output with a Y. LRAS, you denote where it hits the x-axis, the our GDP and output axis, with a Y star, because that's where we want to be. So we put a little star next to it, okay? So the best outcome is when LRAS, AD, and SRAS, their equilibrium is all the same. And that's what this looks like right here, okay? So we have the AD curve, the SRAS curve, and the LRAS curve, where they all meet is 1 point, and that's equilibrium. And this represents an economy that is perfectly in sync. The demand is same as the supply for goods. We've got a good amount of employment, of full employment right here. We are producing as much as we can without going into recession or inflation. And our price level is at equilibrium too. So prices aren't up here where they're really, really high. Prices aren't down here where companies aren't making money. They're in the absolute perfect place, okay? The thing about recession and inflation, and I'm going to show you examples here in a second, is that eventually the economy just fixes itself. We fix our production to meet the demand. We fix our demand to meet the supply. We get back out of recession. We go through periods of recession and inflation, and it always comes back to this graph. But the thing is, if the government doesn't do anything to try and fix recession or inflation, then it could take decades. It could take a very long time to get back to this point. So the government takes fiscal policy actions. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is what the graph would look like if our country was in a recession. So our country is where the SRAS and the AD meet, this equilibrium right here. And price is here and output is here. But we aren't hitting the full employment curve. We aren't hitting the perfect amount of output, the LRAS curve. Instead, we are below it. Our equilibrium is below it. That means that this many people don't have jobs. And we call this a recessionary gap. Remember, a recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. Well, look at this. Here's our GDP. Here's where we should be, and here's where we are. And remember, left is less. So this is a recessionary gap where full employment is not meeting up with our equilibrium, and the equilibrium is behind it. It's receding behind it, okay? And the government will try and use fiscal policy to fix this. And to fix it, the government would try and shift this AD curve, and we'll be doing this, so don't freak out. Shift this AD curve to meet where LRAS would be, somewhere around there, okay? All right, the opposite of this would be an inflationary gap. An inflationary gap is where we're not at full unemployment and full output, and instead we're above it. We're at like really close to 0 unemployment. Prices are higher than they should be. Our economy is like overactive right now. It's kind of freaking out. So our equilibrium where we are is right here, but where we should be is right here. Sorry. So we're right here, but where we should be is right here. An equilibrium, SRAS, LRAS, and AD meeting. And the gap between where we are and it's like too much and price levels are too high and where we should be, the LRAS curve, is called an inflationary gap because our price level is right here when it should be right here where LRAS meets the SRAS curve, okay? And the government will try and use fiscal policy to manipulate this as well. So the way they would do that is try to use contractionary policy to contract the economy and put the AD curve in the perfect spot right there. So we would have SRAS, LRAS, and AD all meet, okay? So the reason we learned fiscal policy a few days ago is because you already know how to shift that AD curve using the C and G functions. So the government can manipulate parts of AD to fix recessions, and to fix a recession, we would use expansionary fiscal policy. To fix inflation, we would use contractionary fiscal policy. And the point is to get our country back to that perfect equilibrium where LRAS, full employment, output, all of it meets where the ADAS curve is, okay? So, just like I told you, expansionary. To fix a recession, the government needs to increase AD. And as you can see on the graph, the old AD was here. The old AD was here. And the old LRAS is here. And SRAS is here. So our equilibrium is here, but our equilibrium is not touching the LRAS curve. We are not at full employment. Instead, we are behind it. We are not at full output, Y star. Instead, we're behind it, okay? So we need to push forward and get towards full employment. We need to expand the economy, okay? So if we're behind it, this was called the recessionary gap, remember, because our price level and output was receding behind the actual price level and output that we should be at. To get out of a recession, we use expansionary. We have to expand and push outward. So how do we do this? The government needs to increase AD. And remember, when the government increases AD, they are manipulating the C function, consumer spending, and the G function, government spending. So manipulating the C function could be like a stimulus package, or it could be cutting taxes. And then manipulating the G function would just be raising government spending, maybe Social Security, maybe more military spending, maybe more infrastructure spending like roads and bridges and interstates and things like that. Okay, so that's how we would push the AD curve outward. And when we do push that AD curve outward, it looks like what you see on the screen here, okay? So the government would try to spend enough money to get us to the point where our AD curve meets the SRAS curve and the LRAS curve perfectly at equilibrium. And our economy would be acting then at full employment, the perfect amount of output, the right price level to where it's not too expensive, but our companies still make money. And that's the purpose of expansionary fiscal policy, okay? To get us out of a recession. Here was the recession. Let's get us out of the recession, okay? The opposite of that would be contractionary. So remember, when the economy is overactive, prices are too high, and it causes people to not want to buy things. That is called inflation, okay? When the value of your money goes down because price levels are increasing and you don't have as much purchasing power. The government wants to fix that. So kind of like look at this as if the pink is not there. We have an SRAS curve, an AD curve, and an LRAS curve. But our output, where the SRAS and the AD equilibrium is further to the right than where we should be, okay? So here is Y, and here is Y star, where we should be. We are expanding beyond where we should be, okay? So this causes price levels to be up here when they should be down here, and that causes people to not want to buy stuff. So what does the government need to do? They need to decrease AD, and as we learned last week, they can decrease AD by manipulating the C and G functions of the AD curve. So they would want to decrease consumer spending and decrease government spending. They could decrease consumer spending by raising taxes, and they could decrease government spending by cutting benefits, just decreasing government spending in general, cutting government salaries, those sort of things, okay? So if they do that and they make that AD curve shift inward, right here to this pink line, what has now happened? Well, now our AD curve, our SRAS curve, and our LRAS curve all meet at the perfect equilibrium, the perfect amount of output, the perfect price level, okay? So our price level went down and our output went down as well, but it's to the perfect spot. It's to the sweet spot, okay? All right, so first of all, let's look at the graph and decide what sort of gap is happening, what is happening on this graph. It looks as if we've got an SRAS and an AD curve that meet above the LRAS curve. Our output, our Y, is above where it needs to be. That means that we are experiencing a period of inflation. And remember, we called this area right here the inflationary gap. Okay, so we're experiencing a period of inflation. What should the government do to try and bring down price levels and make it so our economy is in the right spot? They should try to contractionary. All right, so if they do contractionary fiscal policy, they are hoping to manipulate the C function and the G function. And should it go up or down? If we're contracting the economy, we're trying to make it go down. So the government could increase taxes, stop government spending, those sort of things, okay? If we are doing contractionary fiscal policy, the overall goal is to decrease AD. So let's see what that would look like. We're trying to decrease AD and make it fit perfectly on that LRAS line. So if we decrease AD and try and find the perfect equilibrium where SRAS meets LRAS, oh, that was a horrible line. Let me try again. We would decrease it to about that point, okay? And just like when we do literally anything else in this class, we have to draw arrows. So draw an arrow because the AD curve went down, okay? And what happens to our new equilibrium? Well, it seems as if where SRAS, AD, and LRAS meet is this point right here, and that's our equilibrium. Oh, make sure you labeled that it's a new AD as well, okay? So this line already goes down to Y star. That's what we wanted. We wanted to get our equilibrium to be at the perfect spot for full employment. Now this line over here, we've got a new price level 1, and from the old price level to the new price level, it was a decrease, okay? So now that we've done the graph, we have to describe what we just did on the graph. So what happened? We had output decrease, so our GDP decrease, and we had price level decrease. If our GDP is decreasing, we are going downward. That will increase unemployment because we don't need as many workers. We can fire some. We're not making as much stuff. But don't think of this as a bad thing because we had too much employment to begin with. Our economy was overactive and that was driving prices higher and higher and higher. So yes, it stinks for Joe Schmo who loses his job, but if we look at it from an aggregate point of view, everything added together for the economy, it's a little bit better because prices will go down and not be so inflated and your money will be worth more. All right, next one. So what fiscal policy action should the government take? The first thing we have to do is look at the graph and think, what is the problem on this graph? So we've got an SRAS and an AD that are meeting right here, price level and output, but that is all below where they should be. The LRAS curve is where it should be. Y star is where it should be. So our output, Y1, is less than Y star. If it's less than, if we are doing less than what we should be, if our economy is having issues, we call that a recession. And it's 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. So if we're in a recession, what should the government do to get us out of a recession? They need to expand the economy. Expansionary. So they should take expansionary fiscal policy here. Okay, how do we expand the economy? Well, we want to increase AD. That's the goal because that's expansionary fiscal policy. How do we increase AD? We increase consumer spending and increase government spending. Okay, How do we increase consumer spending? We cut taxes, we pass stimulus bills, kind of like the COVID-19 stimulus bill. We increase government spending. Sorry. And when we do that, the AD curve will shift forward. It will shift to the right because right is more. And we're hoping that shift will be right to the sweet spot where LRAS, SRAS, and AD meet. So let's draw that. We want to shift it that way. There we go. Label it AD sub 1. Give me an arrow. And now we need to find our new equilibrium. So where AD, SRAS, and LRAS meet is our equilibrium point. So here it is right there. And we go down and look, we're exactly where we need to be at Y star. And we go over and look, we are at a new price level. From our old price level to our new price level looks like an increase. So let's go ahead and write that over here. Price level increased, okay? From our old output, our GDP, to our new output, our GDP, looks like an increase. So put an arrow and describe it over here. And if we are increasing our GDP, we're increasing AD, we're increasing the amount of things people want, the amount of things that are being made in factories, we need more workers to make that stuff. That will decrease unemployment because we have to hire more people. And that is kind of the whole goal of a recession fixing policy, expansionary policy, is because if we're making stuff down here and we're supposed to be at this point with full employment, that probably means that we've got a lot of unemployment, and we want to fix that. So how do we fix that? Expansionary fiscal policy, and that decreases unemployment. Okay? All right, that's all for today. Thank you.